Hey, welcome to part 10 of our Healed series of the Growth Track. I am so thankful that you have made it this far. Up to this point in the Growth Track, you've learned about what it means to be saved and how that affects your everyday life. Then, in the second section, the Set Free section, you learned about spiritual strongholds and how the Lord has given you spiritual authority to overcome your spiritual baggage and to come against the forces of the enemy in your life. In this section, we've talked all about how you can live a healed and healthy life for Jesus. And we talked about that being a process. The first part of the process is allowing Jesus to identify in you what needs to be gotten rid of, the one or two things in your life that He wants to remove as obstacles so that you can move forward. The second part of that is then filling that void, that space left by those obstacles, with good things so the enemy doesn't come and try to fill them with something else. Then the third part is realizing that Jesus is willing to heal you if you are willing to do the work with Him and to partner with Him in getting healthy. The fourth part of that is beginning to develop a plan. Jesus will give you action steps to begin to put into place if you'll listen to those and do them. However, part 5 is all about how you don't want to get ahead of yourself. You want to do them little by little so that you don't get overwhelmed. Part 6 taught us how we need to track our progress. We need to put those spiritual standing stones in place so that we can look back and remember how far God has brought us so that we don't become tempted to give up and go back. Part 7 was all about the reality that you're going to struggle and you need to expect that. And struggling is not a sign of weakness, it's just a sign that you're human. In part 8, we talked about the fact that you have to stop punishing yourself. Even when you make mistakes or take a step backward, Jesus has already taken all of your punishment on the cross, so you don't have to punish yourself in His place. And then in our last video, we talked about the importance of consistency. If you're willing to be faithful with the little things, Jesus will give you opportunity to be faithful with the big things. So here it is, the last part of the Healthy series, part 10. Part 10 is the most important one. Don't give up. Every single day, you're going to be faced with a temptation to quit. You know what? Failure is not making a mistake. Genuine failure only occurs when you quit trying. Never quit trying, because the only person that you're giving up on is yourself. And what you're actually saying in that moment is that Jesus isn't big enough and He isn't strong enough to get you where you need and want to be. Now, if you're relying on your own strength to get you there, yeah, you might as well give up right now, because at some point in your future, you're not going to have the strength to continue on. But if you've learned to rely on Jesus, and that, trust me, it takes every single day of our lives for us to learn how to do that. If you learn how to rely on Him more and more, He's going to give you the strength to keep moving forward. However, like I mentioned, we're all human. And we all have those desires and those temptations sometimes to quit along the way. Now, what I have found in my own life, and maybe you can relate to this yourself, is kind of ironic, but sometimes the moments that I have wanted to give up the most came right after my biggest victories. So I would get on the scale after, 4 or 5 hard weeks of really living it out. And man, I would lose, a good amount of weight, maybe 10, 15, 20 pounds in that time. And my clothes would feel looser and I could notice some changes in the mirror and I start feeling better about myself. And then all of a sudden, when my guard gets let down, that's when the enemy attacks. Over and over and over again in the scriptures, we say that Satan always attacks at an opportune moment. He did it to Jesus. He's going to do it to us. And so what that means is when we let our guard down a little bit, well, all of a sudden, some of those old desires, they'll come back pretty strong. And if we're not careful, we can convince ourselves that we're strong enough now to have a little bit of that old thing and we won't go back to it completely. Well, that's a lie straight from the pits of hell, because I know that I've believed that and I've justified wrong behavior by saying, well, you know what? I'll start again tomorrow, or I'll start again Monday. And I just begin to believe the same set of lies that led me down that track and that path of being unhealthy in the first place. So don't give up. Even after a great victory, praise Jesus for that victory and keep moving forward. Or after a defeat, let's say you do make a mistake. Let's say you allow a certain word to come out of your mouth or even a certain behavior to come back into your life for a day or maybe a season. Get back on track. You've been doing this process. You've understood the first 9 parts of being healthy. So you know what you're doing. Don't give up on yourself. Just get back to doing the things that you know to do and allow consistency to take over. Let me share with you a story in the Bible about someone who understood what it was like to want to give up right after a great victory. So in the book of 1 Kings, in chapter 19, we see Elijah. Now, Elijah was one of the mightiest prophets in the Old Testament. God used him to do all sorts of truly astounding and amazing things. Elijah heard God's voice and was able to perform miraculous things, which are simply things that only God can do. So God used Elijah to do these things. Now, Elijah had just faced off against the king of Israel and his wife, a king named Ahab and Jezebel. And they had surrounded themselves with hundreds and hundreds of prophets of this demonic god named Baal. And so Elijah challenged them to a standoff of sorts. And he had told them to build an altar to their God, and he would build one to his. And whoever called on the name of their Lord and their God responded, that was truly the one true God. So the prophets of Baal, they built their altar and they offered their sacrifices and they cried out to Baal all day long for hours and hours. And Elijah kind of mocked them for that. And they even resorted to cutting themselves and to hurting themselves, thinking that that would somehow make their God listen to them. But nothing happened. And then Elijah took his turn. Now, Elijah offered his sacrifice upon the altar, but then he dumped gallons and gallons, hundreds of gallons of water down upon it so that it was soaking wet. Even the trench around the altar was filled with water. And then Elijah called on the name of his God, our God, Yahweh, and fire came from heaven, and it completely ate the sacrifice, the wood, and even burnt up the stones so that nothing was left. And Elijah won this amazing victory. And these prophets of this demonic god were destroyed. And the one true God of Israel was revealed for who he is. And the people's hearts were turned back to Yahweh, which was an amazing victory. But then the next day, Queen Jezebel, well, she wasn't happy. And so she declared that she was going to kill Elijah. Now let's pick up the story in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3. It says, Elijah was afraid, and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Then he laid down and he slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some baked bread on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and he lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, Get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. So he got up and he ate and drank the food, and that gave him strength. And he traveled 40 days and nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. So what do we learn from this story? Well, we learn the reality that even after our greatest victories, even after we've been able to accomplish something that we didn't think was possible before, man, it's really easy for us in those moments to let down our guard and to allow the enemy to creep in and for us to go back to some old ways of thinking or the old ways of acting. And it feels like we've destroyed our forward progress, and it makes us want to quit and just give in and go back completely to where we were before. Now, if you're anything like me, you've done that a few times. maybe a few dozen or a few hundred times where you'd built it up in yourself that you were going to start doing the right thing and you just quit and you went back to the old. Maybe it was to a relationship, maybe it was to a behavior or to a way of thinking, but whatever it was, you went backwards instead of forwards. Well, I want to tell you right now that failure, it can happen, but it can only happen if you choose to quit on yourself and on Jesus. Just because you make a mistake, that doesn't mean that you're done for. That doesn't mean that it's over. And it's definitely not justification to give up. In Elijah's case, Elijah said, God, I want to be done. Will you just let me die? Will you just let me quit so that I can stop struggling? God wasn't done with Elijah. There were still great things for Elijah to do in his name. And you know what? God still has great things for you to accomplish. If you'll allow him to remove those obstacles from your life, and if you'll partner with him in doing the things that he shows you to do, you can get healthy. You can get healthy in your emotions. You can get healthy in your thinking. You can get healthy in your spirit. You can get healthy in your body. Jesus wants to remove the obstacles that are holding you back, and he will. Jesus is willing. So, if you're willing to do the work, Jesus has already done the work on the cross. Our healing is provided for in the atonement. In Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, he has proven his power and his authority, and he is willing to touch our lives and to empower us so that we can be the healthy people he has created us to be. Just don't quit. Keep moving forward.